Before we can do anything, we need to apply a release agent to both halves of the mold. This will allow us to get the part out next week. Shake the can and apply a liberal coating to both halves, and you can immediately take it back to your workstation. The first thing you need to do is cut the fiberglass cloth. You have a razor wheel for cutting the cloth, which is extremely sharp, so put on the Kevlar glove, then lay the template on the cloth and try to orient the fibers in one direction as best you can. Then apply a little pressure and glide the razor wheel over the cloth to cut it. Remove the Kevlar glove and set the template aside. Then use a wood stick to lift the cloth up. The cloth will fray very easily. Carry the fiberglass strip back to your workbench and carefully lay it into the bottom half of the mold. This has the dowel pin. I would advise using the wood stick as much as possible and avoid using your fingers to avoid fraying. Make sure all the fibers of the strip are within the mold cavity to avoid any leakage of the epoxy later. Then put the top half over the bottom, align the dowel pins. You can begin to assemble the mold by inserting the screws. Be sure not to use any screws that are fouled with epoxy. Just throw these in the garbage. We're going to fast forward this up ahead, but you get the idea of tightening these screws. You want to make sure all the screws are tight. You don't want to over tighten them, otherwise you'll strip the threads, but make sure they're snug. For the aluminum molds, you need to put some tape on the ends to avoid the epoxy leaking from the mold. Just cut about a 2-inch strip and place it on both ends. Break off a strip of masking tape and place it on top of the mold. And next you're going to write on your section number and one of the teammates' last name or some kind of identifying feature. Next you want to apply some grease to both ports, both inside the porthole, and then use the swab end to apply grease around the top surface near the port. This will prevent epoxy from adhering to the mold and allow us to get the part out next week a little easier. In parallel to the mold prep, teammates can prepare the epoxy. You first grab a syringe and extract the plunger, then insert one of the red tips or plugs into the tip of the syringe. Set the syringe down and pick up a mixing cup and dispense 2 pumps of epoxy and then 2 pumps of the hardener. Both are metered automatically to provide you with the proper mix. Then use a tongue depressor and gently fold the mixture together. After the epoxy has been sufficiently mixed and blended, wipe off the wooden compressor and lay it on the table or throw it out. And then you're going to fill the barrel of the syringe. You want at least 30 milliliters of epoxy mixture. You want to be gentle at this point because if you pour it too quickly, you're going to cause bubbles to form. Next step is to put this in the bell jar, and we're going to create a vacuum to try to mitigate the bubbles. Your GSI will probably handle this portion of the lab. We leave it in there for about 5 minutes, but you can see the bubbles are moving toward the top. Okay, after 5 minutes, the GSI can turn off the vacuum pump. And then vent the bell jar, and this will allow you to remove the lid. You can carry the syringe barrel back to your workbench and extract the red plug. Then insert the tip of the syringe into the lower port. Gravity feed should be fine. It will take a while, but if it does stagnate, use the plunger to, I guess, encourage flow. Go very slowly to mitigate any bubble formation. Toward the end, keep your eye on the upper port, and eventually you'll see epoxy emerge from the port. You can remove the syringe from the lower port, but you do want to kind of crown over the port with extra epoxy. As bubbles emerge, this will be kind of like a makeup supply of epoxy to fill in. Finally, clean up your workstation by throwing out the mixing cup and syringe, and return the red plug to the cup for reuse.